Face-delayed bullet. The universe isn't just a chaotic storm of random events. It's a meticulous accountant with a dark sense of humor and an infinite amount of patience. Consider the strange ledger of Henry Ziegland, a man from Honey Grove, Texas, who in 1883 made the fateful decision to end his engagement. The act utterly destroyed his fiancée, who, consumed with grief, took her own life. Her brother, blinded by rage and a thirst for frontier justice, hunted Ziegland down. He found him on his property, cornered him, and fired a single shot. Believing Ziegland was dead and his sister's honor avenged, the brother then turned the gun on himself, ending his own life in a final act of despair. But here's the cosmic plot twist. Ziegland wasn't dead. He wasn't even seriously injured. The bullet had merely grazed his cheek, missing his skull by millimeters before slamming into a large tree behind him. For 2 decades, that bullet remained lodged in the wood, a silent, leaden monument to a day of tragedy. Ziegland, for his part, considered himself a man who had stared death in the face and won, a man who had outsmarted fate itself. He went on with his life, the incident becoming a local legend. Then, in 1913, 20 years later, Ziegland decided to clear some of the land on his property. One of the trees he needed to get rid of was the very one that held the bullet meant for his heart. It was a massive, stubborn old tree, and the thought of felling it with an axe was exhausting. So Ziegland decided on a more expedient solution: dynamite. He drilled holes, packed the explosives, and lit the fuse. The resulting blast was spectacular, ripping the tree to shreds and sending fragments of wood and shrapnel flying in every direction. One of those fragments, propelled by the concussive force of the explosion, was a small, misshapen piece of lead. The dynamite charge had dislodged the 20-year-old bullet and fired it like a projectile from a cannon. It shot across the clearing and struck Henry Ziegland squarely in the head, killing him instantly. The bullet, fired in a moment of passion 2 decades earlier, had finally, and with impossible precision, reached its intended destination. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes fate has a delivery address, and it doesn't give a damn about postage delays.
Cursed by lightning. If destiny is a sniper, then Major Walter Summerford was its most stubbornly persistent target. This British officer's life was a bizarre, almost comical chronicle of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, a slapstick tragedy written by the heavens. His improbable story begins in the muddy, war-torn fields of Flanders in 1918. While charging across the battlefield on horseback, Major Summerford was, out of nowhere, struck by a bolt of lightning. The blast threw him from his horse and left him paralyzed from the waist down, abruptly ending his military career. After a long recovery, he moved to Vancouver, Canada, hoping for a quieter, less electrically charged existence. The universe, however, had his new address. In 1924, 6 years after the first strike, Summerford was enjoying a peaceful day of fishing along a riverbank. A storm rolled in, and he took shelter under a tall tree. That tree was then struck by lightning. The charge traveled down the trunk and into Summerford, paralyzing the entire right side of his body. It took him 2 more years of grueling therapy to recover, but recover he did. He could walk, he could fish, he could enjoy the outdoors again. But his dance with atmospheric electricity was a trilogy. In 1930, on a bright, sunny summer afternoon, Summerford was walking through a city park. Eyewitnesses reported there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Suddenly, a single, rogue bolt of lightning descended and struck him for a 3rd time. This strike was the knockout blow. It left him completely and permanently paralyzed. He died 2 years later, a man defeated not by war, but by a baffling meteorological vendetta. But the story isn't over. 4 years after his death, in 1936, a thunderstorm passed over the cemetery where he was laid to rest. A bolt of lightning struck the graveyard, obliterating a single headstone. You already know whose it was. struck 3 times in life and once more in death. It's a pattern of misfortune so specific and relentless that it feels less like coincidence and more like a cosmic entity repeatedly trying to smite one particularly unlucky man.
A 127-year book. A book's journey can be long and winding, but few have had a more improbable homecoming than a specific copy of Dr. J.S.C. de Boinville's The Young Doctor. In 1823, a London-based colonel named Robert Shafto lent his personal copy to a trusted friend, John G. Stevenson. The book was a popular medical text, and such loans were common among gentlemen of the era, but the book was never returned. For 127 years, its whereabouts were a complete mystery. It was likely passed from hand to hand, sold at a dusty bookstall, forgotten in an attic, its journey through time and ownership completely unrecorded. Now, fast forward over a century to 1950, and Londoner named A.S. Davidson was sorting through a collection of old books he had recently acquired. Among them was a weathered, leather-bound copy of The Young Doctor. He opened the front cover and found an inscription with the signature of the original owner, Colonel Robert Shafto. Interesting, but not earth-shattering. But then he saw a second inscription, the name of the man to whom the book had been lent all those years ago, John G. Stevenson. Mr. Davidson stared at the name, a jolt of recognition running through him. It wasn't just a random name from the past. John G. Stevenson was his own grandfather. The very book his grandfather had borrowed and failed to return in 1823 had, through a series of chances so astronomical they defy calculation, found its way back into the possession of his direct descendant. For a specific, non-famous, non-valuable book to survive for over a century and then to be discovered by the grandson of the very man who borrowed it is a coincidence that feels like a quiet literary miracle. It's as if the book itself held a memory of it. Killer taxi glitch. Bermuda is a tiny island, a mere 21 square miles of land in the vastness of the Atlantic. In such a small, enclosed space, you'd expect lives to intersect. But in 1975, the island became the stage for a coincidence so grotesquely symmetrical and statistically impossible that it sounds like a twisted urban legend. It began when a man, riding his moped down a quiet street, was struck and killed by a taxi. A terrible accident, but one that could happen anywhere. The story would have ended there, a sad entry in a police logbook, if not for what occurred almost exactly 1 year later. The brother of the man who had been killed was riding his late brother's moped. He was, for reasons unknown, riding it down the very same street. In a horrifying moment of déjà vu, he too was struck and killed by a taxi. This alone would be a jaw-dropping coincidence, a 1 in a million family tragedy. But the universe wasn't done stacking the improbable details. It was the exact same taxi. It was driven by the exact same taxi driver. And, to complete this perfect, horrifying circle, the taxi was carrying the very same passenger that it had been carrying during the first fatal accident a year prior. When the police arrived on the scene and began piecing the details together, they were met with stunned disbelief. The chances of such a specific sequence of events unfolding on a small island, a single taxi driver killing 2 brothers a year apart on the same road with the same moped witnessed by the same passenger, are so infinitesimally small as to be functionally zero. It's a factual account that reads like a grim mathematical equation, a chilling testament to the idea that sometimes the universe's patterns aren't beautiful or profound, but are instead chillingly, inexplicably fatal. The Unsinkable Woman. Violet Jessup was an ocean liner stewardess and nurse who should be famous for one thing: having the worst, or perhaps the best, luck in maritime history. Her story is a trifecta of survival against impossible odds, a bizarre connection to a single class of unsinkable ships. Her career began aboard the RMS Olympic, the lead ship of the White Star Line's trio of Olympic-class luxury liners. In 1911, the Olympic violently collided with a British warship, the HMS Hawke.
The liner's hull was breached, and it sustained heavy damage, but it managed to limp back to port without sinking. Violet Jessup was on board, and she survived without injury. One disaster down. Following the repairs to the Olympic, she was transferred to its brand-new sister ship, a vessel widely touted as being practically unsinkable, the RMS Titanic. On its maiden voyage in 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank in the frigid North Atlantic, resulting in one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. Violet Jessup was ordered onto Lifeboat 16 and was rescued hours later by the Carpathia, holding a baby that had been thrust into her arms. She had survived the sinking of the unsinkable ship. 2 disasters down. You might think she'd choose a new career, perhaps something on dry land, but she didn't. During World War I, she served as a nurse with the British Red Cross aboard the 3rd and largest of the sister ships, which had been converted into a hospital vessel, the HMHS Britannic. In 1916, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, the Britannic struck a German sea mine and sank in just 55 minutes. Jessup was on a lifeboat that was being pulled into the still-turning propellers of the sinking ship. She jumped out just in time, sustaining a traumatic head injury, but once again surviving. The same woman, the 3 sister ships, 3 major maritime disasters, and 1 improbable survivor. Violet Jessup, later nicknamed Miss Unsinkable, is a human coincidence, a living testament to the strange, intertwined fates of 3 colossal vessels. Voice in the Wall. In 1947, in the quiet French town of L'Île-Adam, a young girl named Micheline Coulombe was playing in her family's home. During her game, she was startled by a faint, muffled sound. It was a voice, and it seemed to be coming from inside one of the walls. Frightened, she ran to get her parents. They listened intently and heard it too, a weak but distinct cry for help, emanating from what they thought was solid stone. They realized the sound was coming from a sealed-off, long-forgotten cellar adjacent to their own. They immediately called the authorities. Rescuers arrived and began breaking through the thick wall. When they finally breached it and descended into the pitch-black space, they found a man, emaciated and barely alive. He was a political prisoner, a member of the French resistance, who had been walled up in the cellar by the Gestapo during the final desperate days of the Nazi occupation in 1944. For 3 years, he had survived in total darkness on a trickle of water and a few insects. His survival was a miracle. But the coincidence that elevates this story into the realm of the truly bizarre is one of profound connection. The rescued man's name was Jean-Pierre Johnny Soutif. During his time in the resistance, he had a close friend and trusted comrade, an operative he had fought alongside. That operative was Micheline Colombe's father. The very man whose daughter heard the faint cries through the wall was the former brother-in-arms of the man trapped inside. Had any other family lived in that house? Would they have dismissed the sounds as the house settling? Would they have acted so quickly? It's a coincidence that feels like a bond of friendship transcending time and solid stone to pull a man back from his own tomb.
James Dean's killer car. Some objects seem to be magnets for misfortune, cursed artifacts that leave a trail of tragedy in their wake. Few objects fit this description better than Little Bastard, the Porsche 550 Spider owned by the actor James Dean. The curse began on September 30th, 1955, when Dean was killed in a violent head-on collision while driving the car. That was just the beginning. The car's wreck was purchased by a custom car designer named George Barris. While being unloaded at a garage, the wreck slipped and fell, crushing a mechanic's legs. This was the first post-Dean incident. Barris, unnerved, decided to sell off parts of the car. A doctor bought the engine and put it in his own race car. He was killed shortly after during a race. Another racer bought the transmission. He was severely injured in a race when his car locked up and rolled. The 2 tires from Little Bastard that had survived the crash were sold to a young man.
Both tires blew out simultaneously, causing his car to run off the road. The coincidences kept piling up. Barris, now deeply regretting his purchase, decided to loan the car's mangled chassis to the California Highway Patrol for a safety exhibit. The first garage it was stored in caught fire and burned to the ground. Mysteriously, the car itself was undamaged. At the next exhibit, held at a high school, the car fell off its display and broke a student's hip. While being transported, the truck carrying the car lost control, and the driver was thrown out and killed when the Porsche fell off the back and crushed him. After a string of other injuries and near misses associated with the car, it was being shipped back to Barris in a sealed boxcar. When the train arrived in Los Angeles, the seal was intact, but the boxcar was empty. Little Bastard had vanished. It has never been seen since. A single car, linked to a chain of death and injury so long and so bizarre, it's as if the machine itself held a malevolent will.
The 157-year murder. History doesn't always repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes with a chilling and macabre precision. In the small English town of Erdington, a historical echo occurred that is so perfect, so detailed, and so tragic that it defies all rational explanation. On May 27, 1817, a young woman named Mary Ashford left a friend's house after a dance to walk home. She was found the next morning drowned in a water-filled pit, a victim of a brutal assault and murder. Suspicion quickly fell on a man named Abraham Thornton, who had been seen with her that night. He was arrested and tried for her murder, but, to the outrage of the community, he was acquitted. The case remained a famous, unsolved local tragedy. Now fast forward exactly 157 years. On May 27, 1974, another young woman, Barbara Forrest, left a dance in Erdington to walk home. She was found the next morning dumped in a ditch just a few hundred yards from where Mary Ashford's body had been discovered, also a victim of assault and murder. The parallels were already sending shivers down the spines of local police, but they were just getting started. The man arrested for Barbara Forrest's murder was a co-worker named Michael Thornton. Like the man accused 157 years earlier, his surname was Thornton, and in a final haunting echo of the past, he too was acquitted of the crime. Two young women murdered 157 years apart to the day in the same small town, in the same location, after attending a dance with the prime suspect in both cases being a man named Thornton, who was subsequently acquitted. It's a coincidence that feels like a glitch in time, a tragic story replaying itself note for gruesome note. Ferrari's ghost? Ferrari's ghost is only one of the names given to a mystery that I'm calling the mystery of the Mr. Sued Incorrecto. Ferrari was a giant of the 20th century, the founder of the iconic Ferrari automobile empire. He was a racing driver, an engineer, and an entrepreneur who built a brand that became a global symbol of speed, wealth, and Italian passion. Enzo Ferrari died on August 14, 1988, at the age of 90, marking the end of an era for the automotive world. Exactly 2 months later, on October 15, 1988, a baby was born in Gelsenkirchen, Germany. That baby would grow up to become Mesut Ozil, a world-famous professional footballer known for his incredible skill and vision on the field. For years, the two men existed in completely different spheres. One, a deceased Italian industrialist, the other, a celebrated German athlete. But then someone put a photograph of Enzo Ferrari in his later years next to a photograph of Mesut Ozil. The resemblance is not just uncanny, it's absolutely undeniably shocking. They are virtual doppelgangers. The shape of the face, the prominent nose, the set of the eyes, the hairline, they look like they could be the same person at different stages of life. The fact that a world-famous athlete would be born just 2 months after the death of a world-famous tycoon he so closely resembles is a coincidence that has fueled endless online speculation about reincarnation. Is it just a random roll of the genetic dice? Or is it a sign that some personalities are so driven they're just waiting for a new vehicle to get back in the race? The baby catcher. Detroit, 1937. A city maintenance worker named Joseph Figlock was going about his daily duties, sweeping a street. It was a normal day until a scream from high above shattered the routine.
He looked up to see a small object tumbling from a fourth-story window. Without a moment's hesitation, acting on pure reflex, Figlock positioned himself under the falling shape. A 1-year-old baby landed squarely in his arms. The baby was unharmed, and Figlock, though shaken, was also uninjured. A life saved by a 1 in a million chance encounter. A truly remarkable story that would have been told for generations in his family. But this is where the universe decided to hit the replay button with a vengeance. Almost exactly 1 year later, Joseph Figlock was working on a different street, in a different part of the city. He heard a commotion from an apartment building and looked up. From a window high above, another small child was falling. In an act of cosmic repetition that defies all logic, the 2-year-old toddler landed on Joseph Figlock once again. Both the child and Figlock survived the incident with only minor injuries. The same man, in a city of over 1 million people, just happened to be in the precise, life-saving spot to catch a baby, not once but twice a year apart. The odds are simply beyond comprehension. Joseph Figlock wasn't a superhero. He was just a man doing his job. But for 2 families in Detroit, he was an angel in the right place at the right time. A man who became a human safety net in the most improbable of circumstances. Tomb that started WW2. On June 20, 1941, a team of Soviet archaeologists led by Mikhail Gerasimov stood before the tomb of Timur, the 14th century Mongol conqueror also known as Tamerlane, in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Local elders and Islamic clerics warned them not to open the sarcophagus, pointing to an inscription on the tomb that read, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Gerasimov and his team, men of science and servants of an atheistic state, scoffed at the ancient superstition. They were there on a mission from Stalin himself to exhume the body and confirm Timur's identity. They proceeded to open the massive jade-green tomb. Inside, they found the skeleton of a tall, powerful man with a lame leg, confirming it was indeed Timur. They had defied the curse and proven science triumphant over folklore. The date was June 21, 1941. In the early hours of the very next morning, June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history, as 3 million Axis soldiers stormed across the border into the Soviet Union. The invader, more terrible than Timur, had been unleashed. The war would go on to kill an estimated 27 million Soviet citizens. In a strange epilogue, in late 1942, with the Soviets facing annihilation at the Battle of Stalingrad, Stalin ordered that Timur's remains be returned to his tomb with full Islamic burial rites. Shortly after the reburial, in December 1942, the German 6th Army surrendered at Stalingrad, a major turning point in the war. Coincidence? Or the appeasement of a 600-year-old curse? The impossible photo. The First World War was a conflict of unimaginable scale, a maelstrom of chaos that consumed millions of lives. But amidst the grand, brutal narrative of the war, small, strange stories of personal fate unfolded. In 1920, the British writer Sir Robert Blatchford was working on a book about the war. He wanted to include a story about a particular soldier, a Private Wilfred Smith, who had been killed in action. Blatchford had the man's service number and regimental details, but he could not for the life of him find a photograph. He searched archives, contacted veterans associations, and placed ads, all to no avail. One afternoon, Blatchford visited a photographic studio in London for a completely unrelated purpose. While waiting, he idly picked up a book of sample portraits from the studio's collection. He flipped through the pages of anonymous faces, and then he froze. Staring back at him was the face of a young soldier in uniform. Underneath the portrait was the name, Private Wilfred Smith. It was the very man he had been searching for months. But the story gets stranger. After Blatchford published his book featuring the photograph, he received a letter from a woman. She had read the story of the photo and wanted to inform him of a small error. Her son, she wrote, had also been a soldier killed in the war. He had been a close friend of the Private Wilfred Smith in the photograph and had served in the same regiment. Her son's name was also Private Wilfred Smith. There had been two soldiers with the exact same name in the same regiment, both killed in action. The photograph Blotchford had miraculously found, the one he believed to be of the man he was writing about, was actually of the other Wilfred Smith. The universe had delivered the right photo of the wrong man with the right name to the right author at the right time.
The Doomsday Hunch. Astronomers are scientists, people who deal in hard data, mathematical certainties, and the predictable clockwork motions of the heavens. But in 1975, the respected South African astronomer Dr. Peter van de Kamp made a prediction that was anything but scientific. At the end of a lecture at the University of Virginia, a student asked him a light-hearted question: when did he think the world would end? Dr. van de Kamp, known for his decades-long search for planets around Barnard's star, paused. Then, with a strange and sober certainty, he said that he had a strong premonition of a major, world-altering event that would occur on a very specific date. He named the date, March 10, 1982. He offered no scientific reasoning, no astrological charts, no impending asteroid. It was, he admitted, just a powerful hunch. For the next 7 years, his odd prophecy was largely forgotten. Then came March 10, 1982. On that exact day, a rare astronomical event known as a full syzygy occurred. All 9 planets of our solar system, Pluto is still a planet then, aligned on the same side of the Sun. This Jupiter effect had been sensationalized in a book which incorrectly predicted it would cause catastrophic earthquakes. The earthquakes never happened. But the fact that Dr. van de Kamp, 7 years earlier, had pinpointed this exact rare date for a major event based on nothing more than a feeling remains a stunningly accurate and unexplained prediction. He didn't predict the what, but he uncannily, and with no logical basis, predicted the when. The twin car crash. In 2001, an English motorist named Arthur Boynton was driving his Renault Megane through the town of Accrington. He was involved in a minor traffic accident, a simple fender bender. The other car involved was also a Renault Megane, identical in model and color. The two drivers exchanged insurance details and went on their separate ways. A few days later, Mr. Boynton received a letter from his insurance company. It was a standard form, but one detail made him stop and read it again. The letter stated that the other driver involved in the accident was a Mr. Arthur Boynton. Thinking it was a simple clerical error, he called the insurance company. They confirmed the details were correct. The other driver in the other identical Renault Megane also had the name Arthur Boynton. That's a solid coincidence, but the universe was just warming up. The two Arthur Boyntons, who had never met and were not related, discovered they had both purchased their identical cars from the same dealership on the same day. Both men had also been assigned sequential license plate numbers. But the final impossible piece of this automotive puzzle came to light when both cars were being repaired at the same garage. The mechanics running the vehicle information made a startling discovery. The chassis numbers, the unique factory identifiers for each car, were also sequential. The two cars had been built one after the other on the assembly line in France. They were shipped together, sold together, to two men with the same name who then, years later, managed to find each other in a minor traffic collision. It's a story of two cars and two men whose journeys were inexplicably linked from the moment of their creation. The JFK Glitch. The assassination of JFK is a labyrinth of strange connections and unresolved questions, but one of the most baffling and purely coincidental threads is what we can call the Ohio connection. In the chaotic days after the assassination in November 1963, a reporter from an Ohio newspaper was digging into Lee Harvey Oswald's background. He found a lead suggesting Oswald had briefly lived in Cleveland. The reporter went to the address, a large apartment building, and started knocking on doors, asking if anyone remembered Oswald. No one did. But at one apartment, the door was opened by a man who looked familiar.
The reporter, a veteran of local news, recognized him as a former city councilman. The reporter asked the man if he knew Oswald. The man said no. Then, following a strange journalistic hunch, the reporter asked, "Sir, what is your name?" The man replied, "My name is Jack Ruby." This was not the Jack Ruby, the Dallas nightclub owner who would, just 2 days later, murder Oswald on live television in front of the world. This was a completely different person who just happened to share the same relatively uncommon name. Let's restate this for clarity. A reporter investigating the Cleveland past of Lee Harvey Oswald knocks on a random door in a massive apartment building and is greeted by a man named Jack Ruby. The sheer naked improbability of this encounter is staggering. It serves no narrative purpose, fits into no conspiracy, and explains absolutely nothing. It is a loose, dangling thread of pure, unadulterated coincidence, a statistical ghost in one of history's most haunted events.
The Omen Curse. The 1976 horror film The Omen is a landmark of the genre, a chilling tale of the Antichrist being born into the modern world. But the production of the film was so plagued by a series of eerie and tragic events that it became known as The Omen Curse, with many of the coincidences seeming to revolve around the number 666. The chain of events was relentless. The film's star, Gregory Peck, and the screenwriter both took separate flights to the UK for filming. Both of their planes were struck by lightning. The producer, Mace Neufeld, was on a flight that was also struck by lightning. An animal handler who worked on the film was killed by a tiger the day after he finished his scenes. A hotel where the director, Richard Donner, was staying was bombed by the IRA. But the most horrifying and specific event occurred after the film's release. John Richardson, the special effects artist who designed the film's now infamous decapitation scene, was involved in a serious car crash in the Netherlands. His assistant and girlfriend, Liz Moore, was killed in the accident. She was sliced in half by a piece of the wreckage, a ghastly real-life imitation of the very death scene Richardson had meticulously designed for the movie. As the stunned and injured Richardson staggered from the car, he looked up and saw a road sign. It pointed to the nearby town of Omen. Underneath the town's name was the distance, 66.6 kilometers. A town named Omen, 66.6 kilometers away. For a man who just witnessed his own cinematic horror made real, it was a coincidence of pure, unadulterated terror.
The Library Angel. During the Blitz, London was a city under constant aerial assault. In 1944, a German bomb struck the historic London Library, a cherished institution, causing a massive fire that destroyed a huge portion of its collection. Amidst the chaos of the raid, as fires raged across the city, a priest was walking through the rubble-strewn streets some distance from the library. He saw a single book lying in the gutter, miraculously clean and unharmed by the surrounding destruction. He picked it up. It was a rare 17th century edition of John Milton's Paradise Lost. The priest, a man of faith, saw it as a powerful symbol, a story of the fall from grace surviving a hellish inferno. He took the book for safekeeping. Years later, after the war, the library was rebuilt and began the monumental task of trying to replace its lost treasures. The priest, hearing of this, decided it was time for the book to go home. He brought the copy of Paradise Lost to the new library. The librarian who received it was grateful, but when he examined it, he was stunned. He pulled out the library's old pre-war accession ledgers. He discovered that this very book, identified by unique binding and margin note, was the exact same copy that had been officially recorded as destroyed in the fire. How it survived the inferno, how it was thrown clear of the blast to land in a gutter miles away, and how it was found by a man who would ensure its return
is a complete and total mystery. It's a story that feels less like coincidence and more like a small, quiet act of divine intervention. A library angel ensuring that one lost story would find its way home.
The pudding glitch. In 1805, the French writer Émile Deschamps was a teenager in Orleans when a stranger, a Monsieur de Fontibou, offered him a taste of a dessert he had never had before: plum pudding. 10 years later, Deschamps was in a Paris restaurant and saw plum pudding on the menu. He ordered it, but the waiter told him that the last of it had just been sold to another customer. That customer, it turned out, was Monsieur de Fontibou. The coincidence was amusing, and the two men had a laugh about it. Many years later, in 1832, Deschamps was at a dinner party with friends. He joked that the only thing missing to make the meal perfect was some plum pudding. At that very moment, an elderly, disoriented woman entered the room. She was a resident of a nearby asylum who had wandered off. Her name was Madame de Fontibou, and she was carrying a plum pudding which she thought was for a former employer. Deschamps, utterly astonished, asked if she knew a Monsieur de Fontibou. She explained he was her son who had been at the dinner party she was trying to find. Émile Deschamps had encountered a specific person in connection with a specific, and for him rare, dessert on 3 separate occasions, decades apart, under increasingly bizarre circumstances. It's a coincidence chain so specific and so trivial that it feels like the universe was playing a long, slow-burn practical joke on one French poet.
The King's Deadly Twin. On July 28, 1900, King Umberto I of Italy was dining at a small restaurant in the city of Monza. He was astonished to see that the restaurant's owner, who came to take his order, was his perfect physical double. The man's face and build were identical to the king's. Amused and intrigued, the king struck up a conversation. The coincidences began to pile up, moving from curious to uncanny. The restaurateur's name was also Umberto. He, like the king, was born in Turin on the same day, March 14, 1844. He had also married a woman named Margherita on the same day the king had married his own Queen Margherita, and to cap it off, the man had opened his restaurant on the very day that Umberto I was coronated. The king was fascinated, feeling a strange kinship with his doppelganger. He invited his double to attend an athletic event with him the following day. The next day, July 29th, the king looked for the other Umberto in the crowd but couldn't find him. He was soon informed that the man wouldn't be coming. Earlier that morning, the restaurateur had been shot and killed in a mysterious dispute. The king expressed his profound shock and sorrow. As he was doing so, an anarchist named Gaetano Bresci emerged from the crowd, fired his revolver, and assassinated King Umberto I. He was killed just hours after his identical twin in life and fate had met a similarly violent end. It's a stark, brutal reminder that some coincidences aren't just statistical oddities, but are fatalistic threads connecting two impossibly parallel lives right up to their shared tragic conclusion.
Twain's Comet death. Some people are born at the right time. Mark Twain, the quintessential American author and humorist, was born with an almost cosmic sense of timing. He came into the world on November 30th, 1835, just as Halley's Comet was making its spectacular pass through the inner solar system. The comet, visible from Earth only once every 75 to 76 years, was a major global event in 1835. Twain, whose real name was Samuel Clemens, grew up deeply aware of this celestial connection. He felt a personal, almost proprietary link to the famous comet, and as he grew older, he began to speak of it as a bookend to his life.
In 1909, with the comet due to return the following year, he famously told his biographer, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." The universe, it seems, appreciates a good story with a perfect ending. Mark Twain died of a heart attack on April 21, 1910. It was the day after Halley's Comet had made its perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun on its 1910 return. He came in with the comet, and he went out with it. It's a beautifully poetic, perfectly symmetrical coincidence, a fittingly grand cosmic epitaph for a man who understood better than most the profound humor and irony in the grand narrative of existence.